Hey, what's poppin', players? I'm a Sega collector. I call myself that because I've been collecting Sega and Sonic the Hedgehog merchandise for almost my whole life. A lot of my hardware, software, and collectibles were passed down to me by family, and because of that, I have a lot of vintage and very rare Sega-related merchandise not many people know about. So it's my job to talk about it. From video game spotlights, to retrospectives, and of course, reviews on figures and plushes, you can find it all here. So enough talking, let's get the ball rolling. Welcome to the Sega Collector. Welcome back, Sega Squad. You know who it is, you know what we're talking about today, and I hope you're excited because we are talking about some seriously mysterious stuff. But quick, before we begin, you gotta hit that subscribe button for me if you like this channel. That's the best way for you to keep up to date with new uploads. And as always, you gotta hit that like button too, because that shows me this is the kind of content you like to see, which helps me make more content like it. Before a rare collectible can materialize in our very hands, it must first be created. And a lot of work goes into making a collectible figure. You start out with a drawing, then usually a clay or resin sculpture, and then you get to mold making, painting, and somewhere along the way, you gotta get the team who created the character of the figure you're trying to make to even give permission to make it in the first place. That's a lot of work, which is why I find it so mysterious and low-key kind of funny when a company goes through all this work and decides to just not release a figure anyway. Essentially, what your boy is talking about today are prototypes. A prototype is supposed to be a mock-up or a general idea of what the final version of something will be. There are prototype Sonic games, and of course Sonic prototype movies, and a ton of prototype Sonic collectibles. Prototypes usually range in style and design. Sometimes a prototype will look like an item you could literally find at a store, just might not have the tag stitched onto it. Other times, prototypes can appear to be molds of figures that are completely unpainted. Being a collector's one thing, you know? You got a bunch of figures and plushes throughout history that you try to obtain, but collecting prototypes? That's incredibly difficult, because more often than not, prototypes are never really kept. They usually get recycled into something else or just completely thrown away by the company. Now, of course, you might ask yourself, why throw away something that's so one-of-a-kind and valuable? Well, it's never done intentionally. If you're someone working at a toy production company, odds are you make hundreds of the same thing like every hour every day. So who cares if one gets thrown out? You literally have the molds to make more. At the same time, sometimes prototypes gotta be trashed. If you, a toy company, present your prototype to, say, Sega, and say, hey, I'd like to produce figures like this, and Sega says, no thanks, then you legally do not have their consent. So legally, because they own Sonic and not you, you'd probably have to destroy the creation you made because, like, what else can you do with it? That being said though, somehow, some way, sometimes, prototypes get out into the world. And oh man, I consider myself a lucky boy because I've got a few really cool prototypes I've obtained throughout the years. Some have been covered on this channel, you might be familiar, some you haven't seen before. But whatever the case is, we're taking a look today at the mysterious, cancelled Sonic the Hedgehog prototypes. Prototype number 1 is something we're going to cover very quickly because he's made his stunning debut on this channel multiple times, but I do have to talk about the Jazzwares Bendable Sonic prototype. Even though I have this in my hand and it's fully painted and ready to go, it never got released, so this does technically count as a prototype. You might think to yourself, hey, that looks a lot like the Toy Island Sonic Bendable, and you would be correct, because early on, when Jazzwares first got the Sonic figure license, they weren't making figures of characters and all these new designs that they hadn't yet. They actually just took the molds from Toy Island and re-released their stuff for a solid year. And because of that, they got the molds for the bendable figures of Sonic and Shadow, and they were going to re-release them and sell those. And that was going to be pretty cool because those bendable figures were very hard to find during the Toy Island run. But somewhere along the way, Jazzwares said, forget it, we don't really care that much, and these figures never got released. This figure right here is an excellent example of when a prototype is so close to the finish line and the item just doesn't get released. I really wish I could have been a fly on the wall in the little factory of Jazzwares just to hear why exactly this didn't get released, but the fact of the matter is, it just didn't. But luckily, I'm very happy to own this in my collection, and now I can show it off to all of you, as I have in multiple videos before. This was set to release sometime in 2008, that's when Jazzwares got their license. The first figure they made was the Sonic the Hedgehog, and then they released Toy Island stuff. So 2008 is when this figure should have been released, but unfortunately it never came out. Moving on to prototype number 2, this one is a real mystery. We already kind of know about the Toy Island Jazzwares hybrid baby, but this is weird. Not a lot of people know about it, and actually, I'm the only one in the entire world to have it. Do you remember those like big Sonic plushes that came with a wrapped blanket that you could find sometime around the early to mid 2010s? That was by a company called the Northwest Company. They're known to make different plushes of characters and then wrap a blanket with them, Sonic being no exception. The Northwest Company actually made 2 Sonic variants, one with a slightly different pattern, but for the most part pretty usually the same, and the blanket was a different color in its second release. Somewhere along the way though, between the 2012 release and the 2014 re-release is this weird 2013 prototype that I have here. This is another excellent case of a prototype basically being ready to go, but doesn't have its touch tag sewn on yet. A lot of times prototype plushes don't sew these things on because they just need to see a visual, they're not ready for production, they just want to know what the plush is going to look like. Interestingly, the first release of the blanket was black, the 2014 release was blue, but this version also came with a black blanket. I find this release incredibly odd because somewhere along the way, I guess the company decided that they wanted to base it on the Western Sonic depiction of Sonic in the early 90s, rather than the more used at the time classic Sonic from Japan that games like Sonic Generations used. I love Western Sonic, he's my baby, I think he's awesome, that's my favorite version of Sonic, but it is actually baffling that they really tried to go through with this. No surprise, when this got pitched to Sega, Sega said, no thank you, we don't like this. So they had them go back to the drawing board and they basically just made the plush they already did, but just kind of changed it up a little bit. I say this is based on Western Sonic due to the physical appearance of some of his details. Notice the darker maroon kind of shoes, the more pointy look. Notice that his spikes are kind of flat, much like how Western Sonic was depicted. Notice also his big oval belly instead of like the cute round one that the Japanese Sonic art has. But the reason that this is a true prototype and not just like some weird random Sonic plush I found on eBay that someone claimed to be a prototype is because it came from an actual factory. This video is going to be a long one, so I don't have the time to go into it right now, but you're going to want to check out the original video that I made on this plush, which covers the whole story of how I got this, and especially where it came from. He is an oddity, and he looks very bizarre with his strange spikes, his big nose, and his tiny little face, and his weird stomach, but man, I love him. I love him so much. I could not part with this guy. Not only because he's one of a kind, but also it's just so incredibly interesting, isn't it? We've covered a bendable figure, we've covered a plush, and now this time we're moving on to 3 that are all part of the same category. I know, I'm afraid to talk about it. I might lose subscribers merely mentioning it. I'll probably get so many comments saying, why am I not a Sonic channel anymore? I'm talking about Funko Pops, oh man guys! Calm down everybody. Funko Pops are certainly something interesting. I do have a love and respect for them, but a lot of people don't because they're incredibly mass-produced, and even as a Funko Pop collector, I will admit, the last couple years they have not been releasing bangers. The whole collecting scene is honestly quite toxic and incredibly expensive, so I've kind of distanced myself from it. But the few Pops I have, I do enjoy, and I have a very nice collection built up with my friends as well. Because we kind of collect Funko on the side, we are always looking for rare items we'd like to have, and truthfully, I was on a website called Taobao where a lot of factory rejects and prototypes can usually be seen, and at different stages, I stumbled upon these listings for these Funko Pop prototypes of Super Silver, Super Tails, and Sonic with Ring. These are oddities, and the Funko collecting scene is very quick to kind of get at each other's throats about what is and what isn't a prototype. There's an easy way to fake prototypes. If you just buy an item, use a paint remover, it'll probably get rid of the paint on the figure and leave it with its original mold colors, and then people will try and pass that off as a prototype. If you look at the actual figures, you can see actual like mold defects and some scraping of paint and other things, so this isn't something like a paint remover. This is a genuine prototype, specifically because there are 2 different colors used here. Typically, when a company is making a prototype of a figure, they just use whatever material they have lying around. That's why you can get figures of like Waluigi with flesh tone limbs, but also purple body and everything like that. It's very funny, but they're only doing stuff like that because they're just working with the materials they've got instead of going out of their way and looking for the specific colors they need. Essentially, they're just looking for a mock-up. They don't care what color it is. So this 2-colored Sonic really fits the bill for what a prototype is all about, so I at least know that this one is absolutely official. The tails and the silver, however, can be a bit tricky, but as someone who owns a few Funko Pops, I can tell you that the plastic used does feel different than that used on the official release of the figures. It's certainly more heavy than a modern Funko Pop is, however. And there you go, my collecting friends. Those are just a few of some of the prototype Sonic the Hedgehog collectibles I've got in my collection. Collecting prototypes is insanely difficult, can be pretty expensive, and it's very rare you even find one at all. So I am truly honored to have as many as I do. Some people try to look for prototypes all the time and they don't have any in their collection. It's all about just being at the right place at the right time, unfortunately. It makes the whole market for collecting prototypes incredibly difficult to get into, but if you find one, consider yourself lucky because you're owning a piece of history. Not like US president history or anything. No, you own history of something far less important and incredibly more stupid. You own a piece of Sonic the Hedgehog collectible history. Whether that is something you should be proud of or not, that is up to you, but I personally am quite happy with the collectibles I have. Tell me in the comments, of all of these prototypes, which ones are you the most interested in? As always, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you on the flip side. See you next time.